Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with my guest, Dr. Cameron Martin, a keynote speaker, astrologer and thought leader on the future of conscious leadership. In fact, Cameron has recently delivered his TEDx talk, Leading from Being, something that we will get into in this discussion. As the founder of Path and Purpose, Cameron guides changemakers, creatives, leaders, executives to align with their soul's purpose and lead from a place of clarity and presence, something that is reinforced through our discussion also. With a PhD in leadership studies and deep expertise in astrology, Cameron blends ancient wisdom with modern strategy to help leaders thrive with authenticity and impact. We get into being-centered leadership. We talk about the benefits of getting that right and the potential cost if this isn't focused on at all. And we include in that what can be learned from ancient wisdom as applies to today's world, particularly the fast-paced workplace of today. This episode is in aid of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, to which we have donated as a thank you to Cameron for joining us. This selfless organisation continues to support those in war zones, trauma and medical need everywhere. Cameron, thank you very much for joining me. Please introduce yourself and your journey as a leader.
Hi, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for having me and holding this space. My journey, there's a lot I could say, but I am the founder of Path and Purpose. I'm a leadership strategist and I'm a spiritual coach, and I work with people to align their leadership with their purpose. And my journey is definitely one that's been very interesting, we'll say. My very first career outside of university was as a high school business teacher. And so I was actually teaching courses around business, entrepreneurship, leadership development. And I was prepared to become a school principal. That was actually my plan, school principal or school administration in some way. And after I earned my MBA, I went for another master's degree. And the only thing I knew at the end of that was, I don't want to do this. This sounds like the absolute worst. And to be fair, I was working in a situation that had very poor leadership. And I knew that I was not aligned anymore with this sort of career trajectory. And so I asked myself the question, how can I actually be of greater use as a leader, and how can I make a difference in this world? And I ended up applying for a PhD program in leadership studies, thinking that's where I'll find an answer. And I did, but it wasn't the answer that I expected. So again, I got into the program, was very much in the mindset of, school leadership, superintendency, a school founder. This was sort of the trajectory. But I also am a very spiritual person. I've always been a spiritual person. And in that period of life, I left the church because I had my own sort of dark night and eventually an awakening. And during that period, it was a big period of soul searching and wondering, what am I really doing here? And who am I really? And what am I meant to be doing on this planet? And I was very lost spiritually. And so I asked for guidance through the help of an astrologer, which was completely not expected. It was actually my sister who mentioned, why don't you just go have a reading? And I said, okay. I mean, I literally have nothing to lose. So I said, fine, let's do it. And for those of you listening who maybe have had an astrology reading, maybe you're unfamiliar, it's totally fine either way. But you might know that it's a pretty profound experience to hear yourself as yourself being validated, your experience, your existence even. And that's what it was for me. I felt like for the first time in my life, I was truly seen. And I remember walking away from that experience going, wow, I need to learn more about this. And I've always been interested in psychology and human motivation and leadership, of course. But now there was this component of, astrology and spirituality in a way that I hadn't really thought about before. And so as I continued my work in my PhD program, I started asking the questions more of what is our connection with spirit and our souls and leadership, and what about being and the nature of being? I'm very interested in ontology and the nature of being. So I asked a lot of questions about that in my work. What does it mean to be a leader? How can we connect to leadership through our being? And as I understand it, through our soul. Each of us, my understanding of my existence is that we each have a mission and a purpose on this planet. It's why we came here. It's why we even incarnated to begin with. And so, what would understanding that offer us in terms of leadership? And I started asking those questions about what does it mean to be, and how does being influence leadership, and what about our soul's purpose and leadership? And that's ultimately what led me to, I would say developing, but really was more of a download of the framework that I teach now in being centered leadership.
Well, we'll come back to that, and I'm beginning to understand, having read a lot about this, why this also leads to two parallel tracks in terms of path and purpose and understanding ourselves and where we might be headed. And there is a greater being centered leadership about us in our lives. And I'm going to bring it then into business, and often we call that conscious leadership, I
Yep.
guess.
Yep.
But I would like, from your point of view, I've not heard it from the point of view you're describing, Cameron. So, from your perspective, what is conscious leadership in the workplace, and why is it so important now, especially as we're heading to the 2030s?
Yeah. Totally. First of all, I'm very happy that this is a term that is studied, research being worked on. People are talking about conscious leadership. And it would be fair to say that that is the realm in which I am playing. I would say my work is very much at the intersection of spirituality and conscious leadership, is how I would describe it. But conscious leadership, as I understand it, is really about developing our own inner awareness of self, our intentionality, our responsibility for ourselves, the systems, the people that we are part of. It's easy in our old paradigm of leadership that is very much steeped in manipulation, control, systems, right? Pull this lever and get that thing, manipulate this person so we can improve our profit margins or change this system. And that's all fine and has served us to a particular point. But now consciousness is shifting on the planet, and people are starting to see and want something different. We're starting to see these systems that we've relied on for a very long time start to crumble and crack. And we're seeing it in many ways. But if you were to go back even to 2020 and how much this world has changed since that particular period of time, and there's so much to say, but I'll be pointed about maybe say human motivation and the number of people who have chosen to work from home, work for themselves, no longer be part of systems that don't feel like they're aligned for them anymore. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of creators in the world that are starting new things. All of that to say that there's a consciousness shift that's happening on this planet. And I do believe it is imperative for leaders to become more conscious of what it is that we're doing and ask the question, what is leadership and what should it really be? And what is the point, the purpose of leading? Is it really about, the bottom line? I mean, of course, that's part of it. If you don't make money in your organization, probably people aren't going to be around for very long. But is that the ultimate reason? Is that our ultimate motivation? Or is there something bigger at play? And so I believe really conscious leadership is the space where we're asking the questions of, where is my motivation here? What is the purpose of this here? And bringing more awareness to the systems that we are part of, and asking the questions of where they might serve us better.
I really like that explanation of conscious leadership. And it's funny, as you were talking, people wanting things differently. We're in a fast-paced world, people choosing different work modes and methods and systems that we're operating in. And I can almost see that in my head of all of that whizzing round a slow motion leader who's just trying to catch up because they're not as conscious of that, or they're in a 20th century mindset of how things used to be rather than where we need to be now. And that is the point. Leaders being conscious of what we need and what we're doing is a great response to where we find ourselves right now in this ever accelerating, well, not just work, but life that we're in.
But life, yeah, I mean, the nature of work is changing dramatically, of course, with AI and but other things as well, political things, economic changes, but even um, the younger generation has a very different conception of what it means to even be successful. And the number of them that say, "Oh, I'd like to be a YouTube creator, and I'd like to influence this, so I'd like to build this." And, that was very different than even my generation. We weren't thinking in that way. And so, with the nature of work and expectations of even our economic and social systems, yeah, we've got to be conscious of the energies that are underlying all of that, essentially.
Yeah, the energies and the motivations, you're right. I think it's very different looking at the motivations of those people who are entering the workplace saying, I don't want a career for life, thank you. I want 2 years of meaningful work, or I want this, or I want that. And it leads to so much. So for yourself, you took that and you created being centered leadership, which you've mentioned already. So please explain what that is and how it actually works in practice
Yeah.
when you're working with leaders.
Yeah, so I love the question, by the way, of practice. And even when I was, in my PhD program, I was always most attracted to the theories that were practical because leadership it can be a study philosophically, sure, but praxis is what's most important, I believe. So the question that I kept asking was around the nature of being. What does it mean to be? How do we honor being? And of course, I am influenced by my spiritual practice, of course, and the way in which I teach spirituality. But I would like to share that I am certainly not what I would consider to be one of those woo-woo astrology practitioner kind of thing. I'm a wildly practical person. So that was the question I've always asked. And for me, when I think about the soul and when I think about our purpose, ultimately it was like, okay, but the nature of our being. And in 2020, a word came to me out of the blue, a download as I describe it. And the word was being space, one word. And I thought, what the heck is that? Like, what is a being space? And what occurred to me is that we are always creating spaces energetically. There are being spaces within ourselves. There's a being space happening right now between me and you. We're co-creating, right, this particular space. But there's being spaces among people. For any listeners who are listening to this episode, they're part of that particular being space as well. And I just kept asking, okay, so if we started to think about bring consciousness to the spaces in which we belong, what would that actually mean? So I do teach around being centered leadership, which starts with this idea of can we bring awareness to the being spaces that we are co-creating a part of all the time, right? Our families, our countries, our teams, and the space within ourselves, our connection to spirit or source or however you understand it. But when I sat down to ask, okay, what is being centered leadership? Like, what does that require? What I understood is that it requires a number of capacities that we should develop within ourselves to ultimately be able to honor our own being and honor the beingness of others. And so the first is presence, being able to come back to this present moment and actually slow ourselves down in our nervous system long enough to realize what is happening in our experience in front of us. The second is inner awareness. So developing awareness of what is happening inside of us. That does mean primarily emotional awareness, but also our belief systems and our thoughts and how is that influencing us and our leadership, of course. The third is embodiment. So how do we bring these concepts or ideas and bring our connection back to our body? And this is very much about developing our intuition somatically. How do we actually know and relate to our body? Because unfortunately, in most leadership, not just leadership, but leadership work in general is quite disembodied, very in the head. We think a lot about things, but what does it mean to connect with our bodies in work? The next is holding space. So how do we learn to hold space for ourselves and others so that whatever needs to emerge will and can? The next capacity is developing deep listening. So how do we listen to ourselves, but also internally, but also those around us, our teammates, our colleagues, our clients, our customers, and how do we really deeply listen for what they're saying and not saying? Um, then learning to take aligned action, which is definitely where this question of purpose is coming in. How do I know what's aligned for me? Well, I have to understand my values. Um, and to take action that is actually going to be beneficial and aligned for us. And then finally, if we're able to develop these capacities, then the final capacity is to honor beingness. What does it mean to honor the beingness of ourselves and the beingness of others, right? What does it mean to truly see yourself reflected in others? And as we develop these capacities, as I work with my clients and the teams that I teach, you can be in various places. It's not exactly a hierarchy, but there is sort of a foundation. If we can't be present in this moment, then good luck hearing what's happening inside of you. If we don't learn to deeply listen and to hold space and respect for people, then the idea of honoring people for their soul's gifts and their particular journey is probably not available to us, right? So there's a sense of a hierarchy, but everybody has these capacities developed in certain ways. And so the way that I teach this is that this is about capacity development. And as we build these awarenesses and capacities within ourselves, and our leadership just changes naturally because the state of our being changes, the way we relate to ourselves, the way we relate to others, and reality around us becomes a lot more conscious. So, yeah, that's the framework in a nutshell.
I've been writing copious notes around this,
It's
starting with the being space, um, which, as you were describing it, being I also take an interest in what's happening in the digital world. It sounds so much like ecosystems and ecospheres around leadership, around being. But what I like particularly about those capacities that you're talking about is the deeply practical mixed with the deeply human, and almost the capacity being building that represents the new way of learning as a leader to bring those
yeah.
both together, because it's not as explicit, I don't think, as you've made it when other people are trying to do something like this and bringing the human touch together with the practical. So I really like that. And the $64,000 question, of course, then, Cameron, is if I'm a leader that embraces what you're saying now, what are the benefits of me getting it right? But if I ignore it, what's the cost of no focus at all?
Yeah. So I will talk benefit and what happens when we ignore. But there was a piece that you mentioned that I think is vital in the conversation around this being uniquely human, because it is. And living in the world that we do today, look, artificial intelligence is here, is influencing us, and will continue to influence and change the future in ways that we cannot even imagine. And that's a good thing in many respects, but we could have conversations about how it's also scary. But point being, it is important for humans to recognize, like, what is human? What are we? What does humanity want inside of this? Because there are things that AI will be able to help us with, but there are things, the seven I just listed, that a computer will not be able to do. So these are things that we actually need to develop within ourselves if we want to lead in a way that is a more conscious future. But what happens when we do? I actually love that you mentioned parallel tracks earlier with path and purpose, because in many ways there are two tracks that happen when people study this with me. One is sort of a personal, individual sort of leading self experience, which often is very spiritual for them. Learning to heal from their traumas, their past, recognizing their inherent belief systems that are affecting the ways that they operate. Um, to be simple with that. But also, because you show up differently, you do things differently, and your team does things differently as well. So there might be space for more compassion, more empathy. That's generally the case. But even more than that, awareness of, people's inherent gifts, a lot more. I see that all the time with the teams that I work with. Like, oh, you know what? This person actually, I know they were hired to do this in marketing, but their skill set is actually connected to that. And oh, these two people are not, they don't get along with each other. Oh, because there's a personality clash. There's an energetic between the two of them that they're working on. That we can all become more conscious of. What I see with my clients is they generally feel like their workplaces are more easeful, that they feel like they have more time, believe it or not, once we learn to slow down. Greater communication, greater trust, um, especially because we're able to build empathy, right, and awareness of each person's soul experience. Better decision making because we're not doing it out of fear or having to do things very quickly. Um, Now, that doesn't mean that we don't operate inside of, an economy, depending, you might, for example, I have a client who's a designer. She owns a design firm. She has a fairly large team. They have deadlines. They've got stuff they've had to do. I've worked with a team at TikTok, actually, their global development events team. Their work is extremely fast. But if we can come back in, connect with ourselves, our decision making can be very different. The way we operate with each other can be very much more respectful, in greater empathy. You can be far more creative. What do we do if we ignore this? Well, I would argue that actually we're seeing the result of ignoring this already. We're seeing people leaving workplaces, we're seeing dissatisfaction, we're seeing burnout, we're seeing exhaustion, we're seeing financial decisions being made that are very poor, or rather very short term, short-sighted. Um, you can kind of look at the system of the world today and see many of these symptoms, where I would argue we have not made it the priority to focus on humans being, what does it mean to put the human first in our systems? And so we're seeing the effects of that. You can just magnify them in the future if we continue to ignore that.
So the two, going right back to how you responded to that
Yeah.
what resonated with me was the leading self track and the leading others track, really, and the greater understanding of self and others, the empathy, understanding people potential. I love that about beyond role, because we have often so many times had people in the wrong jobs because we're filling a vacancy in a role, but there are diamonds in our organization that are just waiting to be mined
Mhm.
if we would only look at it in a different way, if you like. And while you were talking, I was playing around with the word considerate, as in consideration. Being more considered about everything that we do helps us to slow down, to speed up, essentially.
Correct.
So, and stop making the mistakes, doing it collaboratively. So it not only makes sense to me, it becomes an imperative in the world that we're living in to recognize when we need to take time to slow down, even if we've got short-term pressures. Would you agree with that?
100%. Because we will have lots of pressures. And actually, the framework, not just the framework itself, but when we develop these capacities within ourselves, our ability to do this, to hold space, to listen deeper, to connect with our intuition, all of these things, we're able to respond to challenges in a much more meaningful way without fight or flight. It doesn't need to be there. And, I've been very surprised, actually, to be honest, with how well this framework has been received in super practical places. I sort of anticipated as an academic, like, yeah, people would play with that there and maybe in white collar stuff. So my father actually, I was shocked, but we had a beautiful conversation when I saw him last, and I don't see them much. They live on the other side of the country, but anyway, he is a partial owner. I think he's the fourth partner in an electroplating company, which is quite blue collar in the work that they're doing. I don't even know exactly what they do, but nonetheless, he made a comment to me. It's a factory type situation. And he was saying to me that, he thought about this teaching that I've shared in my TEDx talk. And he's like, he was thinking about it the other day because the partners were arguing over something. There was some financial choice they had to make. They were sitting around their boardroom. And he recognized that, oh, this partner was triggered by something that the other one said, but it really is connected to something else he knows, some trauma of his past. And so I decided to like hold space for them. And he was like, instead of reacting like I normally do, I asked myself the question, how can I honor their being? And I thought, oh my God. So first of all, my father can do this amazing, but also that can be in this particular workplace where there's an awareness of like, you know what? We are humans here, bringing our own stuff, our own trauma, our own whatever's going on at home, our own personal growth and development is happening. But if we can like honor that, not to the detriment of the team, but actually to help enhance what it is that we're doing and get real about why we're even here. Every single day we come into contact with people um, in our workplaces, and we've got stuff to do, sure. But if I were to take it at a metaphysical level, why do you think we're connecting every single day? Don't you think there's some higher level purpose that's happening with these people? We don't have to talk about souls and their contracts and all that stuff, but it doesn't take very much to think, okay, this isn't random that I'm working along these five people all the time. There are lessons I'm learning. There's things that I'm teaching. There's things I'm offering. There's gifts that I have to give. And the others interacting with me are part of that journey. So if we just bring that level of awareness, we don't even have to go that deep spiritually, but that like, okay, maybe there's a reason that I'm here. That brings a lot of consciousness to our workplaces as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to something that you started with about your own journey
Mhm.
and the importance of spirituality and looking at something different here. One of the ancient wisdoms, of which you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it astrology, geometry, cosmology, and spirituality coming together?
Yeah.
Um, and being that you've been through this journey yourself and you've become an astrologer yourself, of course, I'd love to know how these ancient wisdoms can be applied from a learning perspective in today's world, especially in the workplace,
Yeah.
and for leaders that we're trying to ask to become more being centered and conscious.
Yeah. Thank you. Obviously, the nature of my work is very interested by my own spiritual experiences. I grew up Catholic, so foundationally, I have a Christian perspective on kind of cosmology. I definitely didn't expect to get into astrology at all. That was a surprise from the creator above. But I've studied much related to Hinduism, Buddhism, Vedantic, many, many, many perspectives of spirituality over the years. And what I've understood is that even this call towards beingness or connecting with our soul and our essence and our purpose does require certain tool sets that, to be honest, were not, they are available, but they had been available for thousands of years. And we do have to look back to ancient wisdom and indigenous wisdom as well to help us to answer some of these questions. Because frankly, our world, the modern world, was not built with these sort of principles in mind. We've kind of forgotten them. Not kind of, we've vastly forgotten them. Our ancient ancestors were far more connected to earth patterns. Life was slower, by the way, so they kind of had the luxury of it, I would argue. Um, they also could see the sky. Most of us live in cities. We can't even with light pollution, right? But I'll speak specifically about astrology. There are many tools out there, indigenous and otherwise, that could help us to understand the nature of our being, right? But for me, that tool has been astrology. And astrology has been around for thousands of years because our ancient ancestors looked to the sky and they noticed patterns that are playing out. I would define astrology as the study of patterns and patterns of energy. Um, and for thousands of years, they've studied. It's very much a science. There's geometry. It's certainly a cosmology. Um, Much of our scientific world, whether scientists want to believe it or not, owe a lot of credit to astrology because it really wasn't until the Age of Enlightenment where those two ideas became separate for political reasons and other reasons. But the point is, what I've learned specifically with astrology is that it has a high degree of utility. Um, it's a bit unfortunate. Astrology is popular in the world on social media and newspapers and things like that, which is okay. Because it brings a level of awareness. The problem is most people have a very, very, very reductionist view of astrology, right? I'm a Taurus, which means that I'm stubborn and I can work hard at this. And, you read your horoscope and, oh, Taurus, you're going to have a bad hair day today, like 1/12 of the population. That's just insane. It doesn't make any sense. It's not real. And I can understand why people would dismiss that as quackery or whatever, because it isn't very useful. But what I've learned is that if we look at a birth chart from somebody's moment of birth, there's so much information in there about who they are, why they're here, your personality, yes, but some of your major life challenges. You as a soul have a blueprint and it's there. And astrology can be way more practical, is way more practical than most people realize. Certainly for me, the reflection of being at a soul level is a big piece, but also timing for making decisions. Leaders throughout human history have relied upon the help of astrologers, and I would argue many of them are doing that today. Uh, Ronald Reagan was actually, or Nancy, I suppose, but it was Ronald. They use an astrologer. I guarantee you, most of the world leaders do now. If you were to look at Apple and when they're, major company, right? And every time they announce the exact same product, iPhone 15, 17, 21, 25, whatever it is, always done on very auspicious days at the beginning of very significant cycles. I guarantee you somebody's on staff there. They know what they're doing. And, from a psychotherapeutic tool, it's also wildly powerful. Carl Jung, we know to be one of the, fathers of modern psychology. He was an avid astrologer. And if you don't believe that, go look at his dissertation, which wasn't about astrology, but it was about the occult sciences. Anyway, there's a lot of evidence, and he would not work with a client, by the way, without the use of their birth chart. I wouldn't either, because it's a map of a lot of things that can be very helpful. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that his split between Freud, his teacher, wasn't really about psychosexual theory or other things. It was probably mostly about astrology. Those things are in his personal journals. So all that to say, there is ancient wisdom and knowledge that is available to us that with our modern understanding and, these sort of questions of the nature of reality and being and what are we doing and what do we really want as a humanity. It's a really beautiful time, I believe, to be alive where we can integrate these things. And integration doesn't mean you need to believe everything. I'm not asking anyone listening to this conversation to believe in astrology or to book a session with me or anything like that. But the invitation is to open your mind to what could be if we were to reflect on who we truly are and what tools are in resonance with you to sort of explore that. Of them, there are many.
Yeah, and how that impacts us now with what we've started with here around being centered leadership, your capacities as you described them as well, and then some of these ancient wisdoms coming together as well. Almost we're looking back to go forward. We're searching for, it sounds like we're searching as humanity for something different as you started with. So I'm going to really put you on the spot now,
Okay.
Cameron, and I can say, right, summarize all of that for me, with the modern, the ancient, and the experiential, or if you like, the human endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
And if we focus it for leaders who are struggling in the workplace, this world that we live in now, trying to make sense of it and make sense for their people, what could 2 or 3 quick early steps be to enable them to become more being centered so that they can, as we talked about before, slow down first to then speed up?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a piece that I'd like to bring home here is like well, how do we do this in a world that's changing, in our workplaces that are changing, all that stuff? We ultimately have to come into connection with ourself, like our true self, who we are. I'm pointing, for those of you just listening, I'm pointing to my chest, my heart, but our self, who we truly are. When we understand our experience and when we are self-reflective and when we have the ability to understand that there's something bigger at play and that our life experience is important and we know our values and we align with that, all of that just becomes a lot easier. Not that your workplace will be inherently more easy overnight, but that you'll develop, as we said, more capacities within themselves. So if you want to become more being centered in a really practical way, the first thing that I always share with people is work on that first capacity, which is presence. So, how can you, in your own life, create experiences of deeper presence with yourself? So, this can be as simple. You have a most gorgeous tool that is with you all the time. It can be as simple as acknowledging and connecting with your breath. You can do things formally like breath work if you wish, but you don't have to. You could do that right now by closing your eyes. You don't even have to close your eyes, but you could. You could close your eyes sitting at your desk and just feel the in breath and the out breath in your body, bringing awareness to this moment, whatever is happening. If you can, you feel the chair underneath your seat. I'm sitting cross-legged, so I can feel my socks against my pants, and just becoming aware of sensation in this particular moment. Not all the thoughts, not the list of things I've got to do tomorrow or in 5 minutes, even right now. Can I just become sensorially aware of what is present for me, right? That can be one extremely powerful tool. It's the first one that I teach. If you want to go a step further, you can bring that awareness inward even more so. And what I mean by that is start to pay attention to thought patterns, pay attention to your feelings throughout the day. Like if I'm sitting at a table with my boss and they say something and I feel like triggered inside, right? There's an anxiousness. I mean, let me be more specific. There's a tightening in my stomach. There's a tension in my chest. There's a in my throat, right? When they start speaking to me, okay, I'm going to bring awareness to that. Okay, in that moment, maybe not in that exact moment, but reflect on it later. Okay, when they said this, I felt all that tension and I felt anxious and, I wonder what was being triggered in that moment. Oh, it's actually a belief of I'm not good enough from childhood, or I felt this in another place. You can start to bring awareness to those moments too. You don't even have to necessarily seek them, just when they occur. Ask yourself, what was that? What is that? Our world is very fast, and our world teaches people to ignore their emotions, ignore thoughts that are maybe negative. If it's not productive, if it's not moving us forward, just forget about it, move forward. And this framework invites us to do the opposite, which is to say, like, look, I inherently have value. So I need to chill for a second. Can I bring greater presence to this conversation, to this moment, to my own awareness of life? And then when things are coming up internally, just be curious. Huh, what is that? What was that? Oh, I noticed this. Those are two extremely powerful ways that sound rather simple, but they are a practice that takes some time. But those would be two ways that I would invite people to start to connect with more of this idea of beingness. Because here's the thing. The framework is powerful, but not just as an idea. It's powerful when it's put into practice, right? At some point, you don't realize when you have a really tense conversation with a vendor, right, that wants to charge you more for something or whatever it might be, that all of a sudden you pause, you stop, you listen, you hear something in their voice that they're actually concerned about something else. And you bring that to awareness in the conversation, and it saves the whole thing. And you don't realize what you did, but you developed these capacities to just be more connected with the nature of being. Um, and so your whole leadership, the way you relate to the world around you, the way you relate to people changes. But those would be two ways I'd invite you to start.
That is very meaningful capacity building.
And I mean capacity as in you're defining it with your capacities. So
Yeah.
just to reinforce that, because it's really important, focus on presence. That's being here, not there, being here in the moment, and then going deeper into that inner feelings, if you like, the thoughts, the feelings, the challenges that I might have, the upsides of what I've got as well. And then you'll probably be more ready to have greater presence with others.
Yeah. And to do it from a place of curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to internal work, people have this tendency to want to fix. And even I think people relate to psychology and therapy and stuff like that, that there's something to fix. And okay, sure, there might be things to heal and move from. I'm certain that's the case for most of us. But if you were to come to it from a place of curiosity, what's here? What could that be? What is that belief I'm holding on to? What is the thing that I value? And just give yourself moments to explore yourself with curiosity. Um, that's kind of the way to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, we've seen in some organizations we've lost the ability to flex the curiosity and in some cases also the creativity muscle because we're so focused on the now or the problems in the future or whatever it is. We seem to be fighting fires. But what strikes me also, Cameron, is I did a launched piece of research on leadership this year. And what was really clear, which plays to what you're talking about, is that 45% of all leaders globally that we surveyed not coping and not confident that they can navigate the future. So not coping now. And then what helped me consider the future? It's like, this is whatever. And a big proportion of them are at risk of quietly quitting. So we have a sort of a leadership drain. So if there's any time where there's a call to action, to slow down, to be more considerate, to be more conscious, to focus on our being, probably me first rather than we. Me, focus on me, then get to the we. It's now. So I am absolutely sure there will be many leaders tuning in and saying, yep, I'm right there on that. So how do they find out more about what you do, what you offer, Cameron, and to connect with you to continue the conversation?
Yeah, so I'd be very happy to connect with anyone in this conversation. And probably the easiest way to have a conversation with me would be through LinkedIn. You can find me there. But you can find my work at yourpathandpurpose.com. I do individual work with people, but I also do work with teams, keynotes, and many other things. So you can find more about that on my website. And if you're interested as an individual into sort of exploring this idea of being centered leadership, I have an online community called the Soul Purpose Collective where we do just that. So every month we connect and our work is about developing these capacities together. So yeah, if you want to just thought leadership chat, interesting, think that LinkedIn would be perfect. But if you want to go deeper and learn more about my work, then I would visit yourpathandpurpose.com.
Well, what a pleasure, Dr. Cameron Martin. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment and support us on your favourite platform and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.